This meeting is being recorded.
Okay.
Tony, I don't have the script. Just it disappeared on my screen. I clicked on Christy's link and it just took everything off my screen. I'm sorry.
Well, that's okay. Then I'll go ahead and I apologize for the notifications. I don't understand how I can get them to stop, but it's and that's what the university is. So I'll go ahead and we'll get started here. So we've got everything. I've got, all right, here we go. Welcome everyone to the Marketplace of Ideas, 3rd Thursday. Today is March 17th, 2022. I am Tani Ferrarini.
I'm Kate Johnson. We're getting together to explore sound educational materials and programs in the humanities and social sciences.
Our hope is that meetings like this today will continue to help you identify great resources. And as we continue to connect with others outside of formal channels, keep in mind ways in which we can make these 3rd Thursday calls continue to serve the community. Our goal is to make our shared passion, better learning opportunities a reality.
So thank you for joining us and continuing to co-create with us on what we're calling the Marketplace of Ideas. Before we begin, let's go through some housekeeping. We're going to record today for video coverage of these presentations and upcoming talks. Please join our LinkedIn group. That'll come in an email follow-up for links. We are transitioning out of Facebook, so if you find that, ignore it. And reach out if you want more information on our guests from earlier MOI events. You know, there are people like Pete Bedke, Jim Otteson, Blake Scott Ball, Lucy Ellington, Claudia Williamson. Okay.
And others. So today we celebrate women's history. Around the world, people are celebrating women and their contributions to overall prosperity and better living. Join us to help celebrate Women's History Month. Hear from Jamie Lufke about the importance of women's property rights, key changes in social views on labor, and how research on economic freedom can be leveraged to frame conversations on how to increase economic freedom and how increases in economic freedom are main contributors to higher wages for women, expanded employment opportunities, more business financing, and equal access to education. Jamie is familiar to many of us. She's our first speaker today. She is a senior research fellow at the Mercatus Center and a senior fellow in the HIAP program at George Mason University, where she earned her PhD. Jamie's specialization is in public choice economics, constitutional political economy, and the political economy of women's rights. In addition to her work on the evolution of women's economic rights and opportunities in U.S. history, Jamie has written on public choice and institutional theory as applied to policing, higher education, and other public services. Her research on these topics has appeared in a variety of journals. In addition to being an author, she's also a co-editor with Virgil Storr on economy, politics, and society. This interdisciplinary book is as part of a series in political economy published currently in Lexington Books. So everyone join me in welcoming Jamie.
Thank you so much, Tani, for that kind introduction. I know that you all have these conversations about how to bring ideas into the classroom. So I'm really excited to be able to share some of what I learned from women's history, and hopefully, you know, I'm certainly not an expert on how to present things to young people, junior high and high schoolers. I don't think I was that good at getting along with high schoolers when I was one, but maybe if I share some of this information, you all will have some smarter ideas on how to apply it. I'm just going to really quickly share some pictures that I brought in to help illustrate and maybe help us generate some ideas for conversation. I have to be smarter than Zoom here because it's covering my my PowerPoint. Okay. All right. So just to give a little bit of the historical background, and I'll gloss over this pretty quickly because I want to make sure to keep it well under 20 minutes, so there's plenty of time for questions. But this is the legal background that United States law was being created within. It's dates back to Roman Catholic tradition and the influence that that tradition had on British law. And it's this idea that marriage is this very fundamental institution in society, and that when two people marry, the woman becomes legally subservient to her husband within that marriage. So this is the famous jurist, William Blackstone, and his description of the very being or legal existence of the woman being suspended during marriage. And it serves as the idea that is the foundation for the laws that wind up being generated in the United States, and also an idea that I think later episodes in history show had a pretty formative impact on our culture, because I think especially when we're talking about things like gender and family, the law, the culture, and the economic activity are all very interconnected. It's hard to talk about one without talking about the rest. So what this means in practical terms is that a husband and wife are legally one person, and therefore a married woman cannot, on her own, without her husband's permission, own land, own a home, own a business. She can't keep wages if she does do work for wages. She can't sign a contract. If she does, her husband can come and nullify it after the fact if he decides that that's not something that he would have agreed to or that he thinks is a good idea. She can't represent herself in court. It doesn't have to be her husband, but it has to, if he's unavailable, but it has to be some other man. Under no circumstances can it actually be her herself deciding to bring suit and making those kind of legal decisions. And she can't write a will. So that means that even if she were to somehow acquire property, say her husband abandoned the family, but not for long enough for her to be able to get a divorce yet, or he's otherwise neglectful and she comes about the practical ownership of some property, she couldn't legally transfer it to her children. So you can imagine this is a pretty strong discouragement for women's investment in education, for women's investment in economic activity or entrepreneurial activity, because no matter what they generate, they can't reap the benefits of it. And then in many situations, they perhaps can't even bring their idea fully to fruition if it's an entrepreneurial idea. So the cherry on this lovely sundae is that divorce is almost impossible. So if you're in a bad marriage where your husband is abusing, his privilege and not considering your opinion, or maybe being actually abusive, you're stuck anyway. In 1800, there's quite a bit of variation by state, but the most common situation would be that you'd have to be abandoned and then wait until you've been abandoned for 7 years before you could file for divorce as a woman. So I want to briefly mention 3 sources of change that I think might be really interesting historical episodes. My experience has been, even talking to the college students I've worked with, that most of them are pretty unfamiliar that even in the United States, women have this level of legal oppression in their history. And so, I'll talk about some of the aspects of this law that extend actually even into the 21st century in some states. So I think many people are unaware of this background, but they're also unaware of some of the forces that kind of brought about change and got us from where we were then to where we are today. So I want to touch briefly on the Industrial Revolution, on the role of democracy and political experimentation, and also on the impact of Enlightenment ideas. And then towards the end, I'll just make a couple comments about some of those continuing challenges and also some of the macro effects that these limitations on women's economic freedom have that are systemic and that go beyond just these women's personal experiences, which alone are, cause to be interested, of course, but to look at it systemically, we can examine some of those macro effects as well. So first, industrialization. The Industrial Revolution really began in the textile industry and with some of the innovations in technology for processing either wool or cotton into cloth. And so prior to industrialization, women were always the manufacturers. So most manufacturing took place either alone in the home or with a small other group of women who worked together in the home. So you can see these top pictures, women taking thread that they have spun, and now they are weaving it on these kind of simple looms. And this is how cloth gets produced. This is why people have so few outfits, because it's such an extraordinarily expensive process. It's also why most garments from this time are straight. So the cloth is so expensive, you can't afford to waste it. So basically everything you're wearing is just a sack cut to some kind of varying length. And after industrialization, the process of generating cloth looks like these bottom pictures. These are a little bit later in the 19th century. I'm pointing at my computer screen like you can see me point. I know you can't, but the bottom pictures, this is after Industrial Revolution. This is later in the 19th century. But even the first machines that would have been available and in use in the 1820s, they quadrupled women's marginal productivity just overnight. So these very first technologies all of a sudden gave women who were mostly dependent on their continued existence from the beneficence of their male relatives, they now have this kind of bargaining chip. And they also have employment opportunities that involve being able to move to a city, being able to leave the household, and they at least have the option now for the first time to kind of depart that domestic setting. It's not really the very first time. There were some limited opportunities for teaching, but by and large, this was the first opportunity that would have been kind of widely available that wouldn't have involved having to go into a business like prostitution or putting yourself at risk of homelessness. And so it's just this incredible bargaining chip and this incredible new opportunity for these women. I like reading their personal stories. I think that they make a really nice adjunct to being able to look at the big picture trends in this industry. So this is a letter written by one of the women who worked in those early factories, which were, by the way, quite different than the early 20th century factories we often think of. In some ways, there were more abuses in those factories because of the lack of protections that immigrant labor would have enjoyed. But these early factories, they actually had to offer quite a few inducements to kind of educate women about this opportunity to work outside the home. So these women took classes. They had kind of group boarding houses where they were cared for by matrons who cooked for them and made sure they went to church every Sunday. So it was a pretty different experience. So what working in a factory looked like has changed quite a bit over the past 250 years in many different ways. But so this is a young woman who had decided to be a teacher. She couldn't get a job. A recruiter from one of the wool factories came to her kind of farm town and convinces her, and she gets to Lowell, which is where these pictures were taken, and just finds these thousands of, in what other context living in a rural American farming community at this time would you encounter thousands of other young women? So I think it was really an unprecedented social as well as economic opportunity. I won't get into great detail in this, but there's opportunity to have some political economy conversation in addition to looking at how trends in economic growth impacted women's lives. The fact that the United States was both a frontier and a competitive frontier, because they were still in the process of forming the nation, new territories and states were coming into being. A fact kind of throughout modern history is that frontiers have been predominantly male because they're usually first populated by soldiers. And so there's really a strong incentive for the people who are leaders in these frontier territories to try to attract women, because that's how you then turn it into more of a settlement, and you start to get population growth, and you start to really turn that into a settled area where people are living. So these are quotes from governors, the governor of Montana on the left and the governor of Colorado and Nevada on the right. And they're advertising. I did some archival work in the Library of Congress and found hundreds of these accounts of different newspaper editors, politicians, territorial governors writing and circulating these things in newspapers, trying to convince women to move along the frontier. So like industrialization gave women economic bargaining power, this is also a form of bargaining power that women can use. This fact that they have an option, that they can choose to go somewhere else. This is an incredible form of power that comes from freedom, and is turns out to be a great protection for women, and a great encouragement of these states to pass women's rights. And we do see some of these territories being quicker to pass reform to correct some of those legal discrepancies that prevent women from making their own property and economic decisions. These territories wind up reforming some of those laws sooner than the more settled eastern states because of this kind of competitive dynamic. And then the last thing I'll say is that the Enlightenment ideas about freedom and equality, when we look back at the history, these actually did wind up shaping the people who do reform work, sometimes in ways that have been forgotten to history because of who wrote the women's history books at this time. For example, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who is a great partner of Susan B. Anthony, she wrote one of the very first important histories of the women's movement. And there were a lot of religious leaders, including women, who wrote advocating for women's equality prior to kind of her formal movement. And they don't really get any credit in her text, which then serves as the foundation for all of our future understanding, because she thought they didn't go far enough, because they still thought that there should be a moral subservience within marriage, even though they did think women could be economic and religious leaders, but those early steps get kind of taken back. But the reason I put this picture up here is that a big part of Susan B. Anthony's inspiration that encouraged her to become an advocate for women's rights is that her parents, Daniel and Lucy Anthony, owned a textile mill. And it was her experiences interacting with the young women who worked at that mill and seeing their competence and their intelligence that first started her questioning why it could possibly be right for women to be denied opportunities that men enjoyed. So economic growth that creates opportunities for women to step into new roles has potential then to change people's ideas about what kind of roles are appropriate for women. I won't get into great detail on this, but I do want to point out that despite all these changes, women's economic rights remained incomplete at the beginning of the 20th century. Women in marriages still often needed husbands' permission to get credit, to take out a mortgage. They had fewer opportunities for advanced education. I've done a fair bit of work on Eleanor Ostrom, who even in the I'm trying to remember if it was very late 1950s or very early 1960s, one or the other, was denied admission to an economics PhD program because they did not think a woman would be able to do the department credit. So that was part of, although she was, of course, an interdisciplinary thinker in either regard, that's part of why she wound up getting her PhD in political science. There's also, asymmetry in access to divorce until the 1970s. There are labor protections that limited women's work opportunity explicitly. There are actually court decisions that declare the state to have an interest in protecting women workers that it does not have in protecting male workers, because if women are not healthy, they will not be able to have children and the United States will go into decline. So they actually make a state protection interest specifically about women. And in addition, because of this denial of economic opportunity, there's continuation of a cultural element that Mary Wollstonecraft described as encouraging women to focus more on studying men than on studying the world or their own pursuits, because if they don't have formal opportunities, they have to persuade men to make the decisions for them. We can talk about this in Q&A if you all want, but as you know, this state of denial of women's economic rights still happens in many places around the world. There's some interesting research on how much this impacts the productivity of countries and how these, many of the poorest nations in the world and the global economy are really losing out by not being able to enjoy women's contributions and women's innovations. And so I think this episode in women's history has the potential to start off a lot of conversation in some of the biggest, most important questions in the social sciences, like what the linkages are between personal autonomy and economic rights. And economic rights are much more deeply personal than I think is commonly appreciated until you really start to think about what it means to people's day-to-day existence and the decisions of their lives. That it can start a conversation about the systemic impact that limiting the entrepreneurial activity of one group of people has on the entire world, on the future of civilization. And of course, we can have a conversation about people struggling for freedom when they are currently in a position of unfreedom. So all of these women who are taking advantage of these new job opportunities and putting themselves in new situations, advocating for women's rights, are all people who did not have the vote, could not sit in a political office, could not yet make the big economic decisions for themselves. So I think that can give us maybe some optimism for people living under conditions of tyranny and oppression in a variety of circumstances. Well, that was a lot, but hopefully when we get to Q&A, I'm happy to talk more about whatever aspects of this folks have more questions about, or just to hear from you all about what of this resonates and.
Well, thank you, Jamie. What we'll do is we'll take questions in the chat box. And Kate, what do you say that we move into Van's conversation, and then we can take questions at the end? Does that sound like a good idea?
That sounds like a great idea. Is that all right with you, Jamie? Because I have a lot of questions, but I have to be a host right now.
I have some questions and I have a few texts. So if we can, would that be okay?
Oh, that's just fine with me. Yep.
All right. And everyone, I put the link to her podcast down in the chat box. My head's just exploding. So thank you so much. Let's turn to Kate. Please introduce Van.
Yeah, that was pretty heavy, Jamie. So if you didn't notice, I was listening and my arms kept crossing. As a woman, I have some experience with the inertia of rules, but I didn't, you never know how bad it is, right? Until you peek up and look globally. So we're going to shift gears. Okay. So we are in for a treat with our next guest. Tani and I got to rediscover Van at a recent gathering of K-12 economic educators, professional educators in Atlanta. Thank you, AIER, for bringing us back together. Okay. By day, Van Prime is an AP teacher at a public high school in Maryland. Okay. But that's his day job. By night, he turns into an economics challenge coach hero. Okay. And he's also the Team United States coach in the International Economics Olympiad. Okay. So his teams, the reason why he's here today is because his teams in the past 9 years have garnered 6 national championships and 9 national finals appearances. Okay. So if you don't know how competitive this is, and he's not going to blow his own horn, I'm telling you, it's extraordinary that he gets this kind of results out of his high school students at a public high school. He also, at the International Economics Olympiad, his latest team won bronze. That's 3rd place in the world. And his students achieved 4 individual gold medals, 3 silvers, and 3 bronze. Okay. And he didn't take a jumbo jet there, right? Okay. So, and they won the world distinction of best in economics in 2019. So he's going to give us a primer, because the first question is, how do you do this? Okay.
So to speak.
Yeah. And he says, well, I'm willing to share with anybody, but I thought it would be a great idea, since so many of us want to reach high school kids and we want to reach them to scale. And this is a kind of program that once you wind the teacher up, and you can set them loose with Van's training, that they can end up having a perpetual program at their high school and get a lot of it. I mean, we've talked about this, and this makes Van's job fun and rewarding, but we also think it could help so many teachers around the country. So that's why we're putting a spotlight on Van today. So I'm going to stop talking and let him take over.
Thanks so much, Kate and Tawny. I'm not quite certain if I am up to the standard of scholarship that we just heard from Jamie. Jamie, that was a fascinating talk, by the way. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to chatting about it afterwards. I'm going to brush through today and talk about how the National Economics Challenge works, and how hopefully we can use it as leverage to expand interest in economic education, a passion for economics among high school students. I have to make a legal statement here. I have absolutely nothing to do with the Council for Economic Education, so I just want to put it out there that I'm not selling their product in any way. But I am saying that this is one of those pre-established national platforms that we can all use to try to get our passion for economics out there among students, among teachers, among other organizations that really want to expand economic education. These are my bona fides, and Kate just ran over them, and they're not all that interesting anyway, so I'll just move on to this slide. And so to start off, the National Economics Challenge is the national competition in economics, in academic economics. It's not about personal finance. It's not about all those things that become convoluted in a lot of people's minds that economics is, but instead, this is a competition in academic economics. And I can say wholeheartedly that this is the most important tool that exists for me, and in my mind, for others to be able to spread economic education. It's right now the biggest competition in academic economics. It has around 10,000 students a year, but in normal years, these are COVID numbers, it goes up to 12, 13, 14,000 students, all of whom are sort of the top of their game in economics. It's the one way for students to be able to showcase their talents wherever they come from, by the way, at a state and national level. And that's one of my points, is this is a way of reaching places that may not even have an economics program in their school system. My school system doesn't officially have Econ. It's a purely elective course, sadly. And this is one way of getting the word out there. And also currently, because this is co-sponsored by a Chinese education group called SKT, it has also become an international competition. And in the end, it involves the United States competing against Chinese students. And to make you feel better, we beat them this year in both categories. So I'd like to just show you a little bit about when in non-COVID years, and this will be one, hopefully, what the NEC looks like. And this is a clip from CNBC on which the National Economics Challenge is actually broadcast. They have a live broadcast, and then during the day, that is, that people can tune into online, but during the day on regular CNBC, people can tune into also. Now, please let me know if the sound isn't working. I've had problems with this. Yeah.
Van, sorry, can you share your screen?
Is it not shared?
No. You were doing so great. I didn't want to interrupt you.
Oh, my friend, I could have just, you know me, I just keep rolling. All right.
Well, when you said you were sharing this video, I thought, no, he means to be sharing his screen. Okay.
Yeah, I did. All right. So sorry about that. Again, I'm not very Zoom savvy, but I'm getting there.
Well, the best and brightest high school students are putting their economic knowledge to test. Teams today competed in the National Economic Challenge in New York, and this year Andrew Ross Sorkin moderated the event and crowned the next potential Jerome Powell or Janet Yellen.
At the 19th Annual National Economic Challenge, put on each year by the Council for Economic Education, students are quizzed on principles in economics.
Land is a factor of production. What are the other three factors?
Capital, entrepreneurship, and labor.
That is correct.
And put to the test to apply these principles to the real world.
Assume a consumer is maximizing utility in the consumption of bread and cheese. Further assume that these are the only two goods being consumed. What will happen to the marginal utility of bread if the price of cheese decreases?
It increases.
That is correct.
These are the brightest economic students in the nation who competed in a field of 11,000 teams to reach the championships here in New York City.
What is the most likely cause of an inverted yield curve?
An impending recession and the yield on longer-term bonds being lower than the yield on shorter-term bonds.
That's
This
my
year,
woman right
Mount
there.
Hebron High School won both the David Ricardo Division and Adam Smith divisions, a first in competition history for one school to take home both trophies.
How did you guys get into economics to begin with?
It's actually really fun to learn, and it's not just something you do for a competition. So that would be my moment.
Okay, so we're not just nerding out here is the point.
Nan Morrison, head of the Council for Economic Education, explains the value of this competition.
Their learning goes far beyond just a recitation of facts. They really understand how this stuff works, and it's incredibly rewarding to watch them.
What do economists call a good that is rival and non-excludable?
A common resource.
Common good.
You are both correct.
For the third year in a row, the U.S. faced off against China, and China was victorious in both rounds. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Andrew Ross Sorkin.
In our defense, they never told us about the China round, so anyway, but we've mastered it now. It's a completely different thing. Anyway, so that was actually my first team that won the nationals. And those kids, respectively, are now at the University of Chicago, Columbia, where one of them is actually interning at the New York Fed right now on a fast track to her dream, which was becoming Fed chair, which she'll make a far better chair than, well, anyway. She believes in inflation. And let's see, University of Chicago, Caltech, and Penn Wharton School. So those kids all had fantastic outcomes. And one thing I need to point out is that we really are just a public high school. We're not an incredibly elite school. It's nothing like that. And please forgive me as I struggle with trying, there we go. But you could just see the joy in their faces. And actually, one of the things I want all of you to think about is picture yourself as a 16, 15, 16, 17-year-old and being on, regardless, so whether it's a local, a state, a national stage like that, and to be able to handle this material, to put yourself forward, and also to be able to claim that I was there. I am one of these, I am one of the top economics students in the United States, and I can prove it. So this is a really, really big thing. So actually, one more very short, I promise, video clip, because I thought one of the most powerful ways of demonstrating how important something is by using testimonials from students and not just from their teacher who takes credit for everything they do. So this is a young, one of my young stars. This is Sudarshan Sundar. Sudarshan won 3 national championships in his time. Again, we're just in our county, sort of the middle school in our county, that is a middling school. We're a public high school. But these are the things that can be achieved. And that's one of the messages I'd like to bring out to all sorts of schools is your kids can too. So let's hear from Sudarshan for just a few seconds to find out why the Econ Challenge was so important to him. By the way, Sudarshan's studying economics at Stanford. He's a freshman this year.
Hi, my name is Sudarshan Sundar, and I go to Mount Hebron High School in Ellicott City, Maryland. My coach is Mr. Van Prime. I've been participating in the National Economics Challenge for the past 2 years, and I've got to say it's been an incredibly rewarding experience. More than just the facts and figures you learn, I think it's really a whole perspective change that you go through when you learn economics. I think back to the essay I Pencil and how it just changes the way you look at everyday objects, how there's this amazing, immaculate system that the whole world runs on that not a single person could possibly fathom, imagine, or put together. And I think it really encapsulates the beauty of the field of study.
All right, and of course, like a good papa, it makes me want to cry to see Sudarshan. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run through quickly about the benefits of the economics challenge for students, for teachers, and then for many of us who are, give me a moment, please, again, mastering this, who are trying to spread economic education. And some of the top benefit is this: students will never, ever forget this competition. In typical years, the competition finals take place in New York City. Well, I can't say wine and dine, but they really, really take care of the kids. They take them on a cruise around Manhattan. They take them to Broadway shows. We had the opportunity to visit the actually a private tour of the gold reserves at the New York Fed. They're on national television. And again, as a young person, how could you possibly forget this? And to see other kids like you do this is also extraordinarily inspirational. So what kids get out of this is an opportunity for leadership and teamwork. I actually have my team teach my younger team, as I could talk about a little bit later, but I don't want to take up too much time. Very important, particularly for students or for teachers of extremely gifted students, or for teachers who have only a small section of students who really seem to be gifted in this direction, is this gives you an opportunity to give them accelerated learning. My Econ Challenge kids come out, and I know a few of you are professors, they come out essentially having finished their undergraduate years by the time they come out of this program. There are also very tangible things. There are awards for them. We all like awards, but they also pay cash awards, up to $1,000 per student for the national championship. And they've actually elevated that award this year, I think, maybe doubled it or even more. And that's a significant amount of money to a kid who's got nothing in her pocket. Also, there's a ton of recognition. Oh boy, is there recognition for them. Not just the TV recognition, but also TV interviews, newspaper articles, as I have up there. For better or for worse, recognition from politicians. But of course, that's extraordinarily flattering for students, and it makes the papers. Very important for students' resumes and for their self-esteem. The winning team currently goes to the International Economics Olympiad. And since Hebron has won every time since the IEO has been in existence, we've also been the team that's represented the United States. And then as far as college admissions, as I'll show you, it's extremely highly regarded. We've gone for actually 3 times now private audiences with the Maryland governor, as well as the comptroller and the treasurer. This, of course, for kids is just absolutely awesome. Here are the awards, including awards from the state of Maryland, our senator, our state senators, yada, yada. You go on forever, but this means a lot to me and the kids to have done this, and has really put our school on the map. Here are the outcomes as far as the universities for our national champions. A couple of them at Chicago, Stanford, Caltech, Columbia, a couple at Wharton, U.S. Naval Academy, Georgia Tech, BC, and of course, our hometown favorite, the University of Maryland, where of course the young person who went to the University of Maryland is not paying a penny for her education. Then we tell teachers what they get out of it, because it's not just about the students, but teachers get an incredible amount out of it. The first one is it's a way of creating real passion among students. There's a buzz in my school. And this is important for me. It pays back to me because my econ classes have waiting lists. Kids want to get into that class. Econ is the class to complete if you're a capable kid who's graduating from our school. That doesn't happen anywhere else, even in my local county, where of course econ isn't required. So it's a great recruitment tool. It's a great way of sparking interest. It's a great way of making yourself, you can never say untouchable, but close to untouchable in the system, which is important for someone who has outlooks like mine. And Kate and Tawny both know that I'm a very liberty-minded guy, and in my type of school system, that's not a popular outlook. But what are they going to do to me? This is an example of what teachers can get, and that is networking. Simply, it's really important. If none of you have worked in the school system, it's hard to picture. It's hard to get visibility. It's hard to have anybody notice what you're doing or pay any attention to what you're writing or saying. And this is one way of having that occur. And finally, teachers get the money too. So for every $1 the students get, I get $1 too, which is fantastic when I have 2 teams winning every year. Anyway, for many of you, why should you care about what I'm talking about? Well, all of those benefits that go to teachers and students and where you're trying to spread the word about economic education. It's already there. It's pre-established, as I have here. And there's literally, no, I can't say literally, I hate that word anyway. There's very little cost to you to be able to put this in place. It already stands, it's already established, it's been around for 20 years now. So you can use this, and it's actually fairly easy to train people. I'm going to give resources. Any teachers you're in touch with, I'm happy to share resources with. And as I said, one really key thing about this to me is that it is a way of getting to those handful of students in what is probably the majority of schools in the United States who are really passionate about econ, who are really gifted in the subject, that is in urban schools, rural schools, Title I schools, who are in small groups. You only need 3 or 4 students, and this gives students a chance to accelerate their education in economics. Okay, I've talked long enough. I do have lots of sort of secrets that I probably shouldn't be sharing, but right now, what do I care? You know, I feel a little bit like Tom Brady right now. If I win another Super Bowl, that's great. But to me, the mission is starting to become more important. And that's the mission of spreading economic education and getting kids passionate about economics, not just where I am, but nationwide. So I'm happy to talk about the secrets to creating champions. But Kate and Tawny, I think this is a good point for me to stop, and you can get back to intelligent questions for Jamie, and not so much just about economics and how proud I am of my kids.
Okay,
This is amazing.
on the deal that you share one secret before we pop to Jamie, like what is it that you told us that you could do that gets this thing to self-perpetuate every year? Because it didn't happen the first year you taught, right? Oh, you have a slide. Okay. The secret sauce?
Oops, it didn't happen the first year. It took persistence. It took a lot of learning on my part. But ultimately, my secret sauce, and I really am sharing this with you, so keep this among yourselves. Just joking.
We won't put this in the tape. We won't put this in the tape.
Is that no, it's fine? Is that there are 2 competitive divisions in National Economics Challenge. I never did. There's an upper division, which is for AP students, for International Baccalaureate students, but there's also a general division for younger students, for students who are taking a general economics class, never taken AP or IB, or in my case, for students who have never taken an economics class before. So what I did was I created a team in the lower division, never even thought about it before. And then what I did is I took kids in my upper division, that is my juniors and my seniors largely, and I have them teach. They just did this today. They did a teaching session with the bright little ones from the ground up. And what that does is it forces my upper division students to learn the material. As we all know, you've really got to learn your stuff before you're going to stand in front of a group of intelligent students and try to teach it. This is, by the way, a problem at the high school level because, frankly, most of us are, as we talked about in Atlanta, most of us are history and poli-sci teachers, and we're scared to death of econ. Well, my kids, the upper division kids, learn an enormous amount, and the lower division kids are reliant on them. Plus, of course, they're going to have to put in the hours on their own. So as I say, the advantages of this, the plus of all of this is right there. We know that you have to teach a subject, and usually often over and over again, really to master it. But it also draws the kids together. They really feel, even though it's hyper competitive and it's the competition I care about so much, it's very competitive, but there's also a lot of camaraderie, which is a beautiful thing because they're all working toward the same goal. It gives my older students a mentoring aspect where they can actually tell the younger kids, look, this is how I succeeded when I was at your stage. The younger kids look up to the older kids and it's like, wow, and this happens year after year. I'm never going to be like Suderson. He's just so amazing. And then the next kid goes on to win a national championship or whatever. And frankly, it's competition. And so what it does for me is I have, in my world, in my non-competitive public school system, which frowns on meritocracy and actually actively works against meritocracy in the classroom, I have this one place where I can actually have, I'm going to use those words, I can't use them in my school system, the best of the best and the sharpest of the sharpest to shine. And that is a beautiful thing for them, for their families, for me, and ultimately for all that, dare I use the phrase or word, stakeholders above me. So that's my secret sauce. I just gave it to you. You happy, Kate? You happy?
You can't hear me laughing. Yes, I'm very, very happy. Thank you, Van. This has been just we have this, we have two great messages here today. And so I want to turn it back to Tawny. Thank you, Van. You're going to get a lot of contact in the chat. So now that you've unshared your screen, you can start popping through the chat. But Tawny, it's back to you.
Okay, Jamie, your aha moment in women's history. What is it that I would say students, undergraduate and graduate students, when they hear what you talk about, what are some of the most shocking things that they learn from what it is that you share with them?
Oh, that's a great question. I think for many of them, it's just so foreign, they don't quite know how to process it. And gender feels like a very touchy conversation for many people right now. So one dynamic I've noticed is that, like, if I give a one-off lecture at a university where I don't know the students yet, I'll usually get questions from either all women or all men. Like, whoever starts, the other group doesn't feel comfortable chiming in. So I can imagine that being potentially an issue that I don't have an answer for, but just to be aware of. But I mean, I think the biggest shocks are how recently this is in history. Up until 2005, there were still some states where the burden of proof, if you are raped by a partner, is higher rather than if it's a stranger. So it's more difficult to prosecute rape within marriage until 2005. This is, I mean, even high school students were still alive then. And so I think the fact that this is not something that's ancient history, but something that we and our mothers and grandmothers have all dealt with in different, scales in different ways, I think is shocking. I think another idea that I think is surprising, given that I get kind of some pushback on it, is just this idea of work as a vehicle for freedom. I think we're used to seeing work as more of like a prison, but the fact that having the opportunity to choose a different set of options was so important to freeing women at this period in history, and that it was a freedom that had to be fought for, that this battle kind of didn't start with suffrage. I think that's another big surprise too.
Yeah, this is great. And I had the benefit of hearing Jamie speak to a group of ISI students, and the undergraduates in the room were shocked to hear about the contractual differences in the right between the sexes and how recently it's not that old in US history. Mortgages, women not being able to get their own mortgage or having their own bank accounts by state. And it really is eye-opening because they're used to hearing about these things as it applies to different races and religions around the world. But when they look in their own backyard and they realize that it's recent history or relatively recent history, there is some shock that moves through the room. And I think that was the most exciting experience I had in recent times with my students talking about these difficult issues. Kate.
Oh, I just wanted to say I had a really nice encounter with a World Bank economist, and he was doing very Hayekian work in India and Africa, where he empowered women entrepreneurs and they could come up with their, it's a bit Grameen Bank mixed in with everything else, but these were 20-year horizon projects. So somehow he was able to work within the structure of the World Bank to do just really interesting stuff. And, he's explaining to me about, and I said, you're giving women, so you're telling me all this stuff and you're saying women now have property rights. Women can do this, women can do that. And that wasn't the case. Like, how did you get this stuff through? And he said, oh, when you hear me talk, you hear that. When the communists hear me talk, they hear this, so it's like, he was just this master politician, but the end result was that through economic advancement and you made me remember when you were talking about the pioneers in the West, because that was just a great vehicle for women to be empowered, because they just needed bodies. They needed people to run boarding houses. They need people to feed people. So women got to own their own businesses, and they got political clout after they got economic clout. And so I can connect you with him. Like, he's a bigwig at the World Bank, but he's kind of doing this undercover. It's just amazing, but he's using economic liberty to advance political liberty for women. It's just fascinating.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about some of his experiences. I know these transitions play out really differently in different parts of the world, because, one of the things that was unique about our experience is that it played out after this Enlightenment ideology. So there were ideas of freedom and equality that had an individualist perspective to them already. And that's not the case everywhere in the world. So sometimes it genuinely is the case, I believe, that some of these ideas about the role of economic independence simply don't exist. There's an educational burden. But yeah, the way that innovation can work around bad laws, I think, is fascinating. And so economic innovation can be a vehicle for change in the legal structure as well as in industry.
Well, it is time for us to bring this to a close. We try to stop on time at least. We encourage all of you to reach out to our speakers by email. And with that, I hope that you recall that we are trying to capitalize on the presentations and the content of them. And we would like to create a reference document that we are calling the Marketplace of Idea Picks. So this is when we turn to FTE, PE, South in the Classroom, Free to Choose Network, and others. We'd like to ask you to send us some references on the documents and the topics that we discussed today. We have Jamie, who's talking about women and economic freedom. We have Vance, who's trying to encourage teachers to get their students involved in the Adam Smith contest and the David Ricardo contest through the National Econ Challenge. Please share information with us to bring us one step closer to creating a network dashboard dedicated to scraping data across faculty websites and high-quality educational organizations. We would like to generate calendars and do other things. So by invitation, you are being asked to contribute. We will work on adding materials to this effort, and we would like to start promoting your websites, and the list goes on. And with that, I'm going to swing it over to Kate.
We'll meet again next third Thursday, April 19th, the same time. We'll send those invites out when we have the speakers confirmed, but we want to just when you get that invitation, feel free to share it with like-minded people, and the more the merrier. Tani?
Yeah, so thank you to our speakers today for trusting us and experimenting with us. We want to thank everyone who joined us on the call today, and those who thought enough of us to send us a text message and said, wish we could join, but I'm sitting on the beach with my family enjoying spring break. We are a dedicated network of people, and we're trying to connect with each other to create many different ways in which we can help others understand how freedom matters. And we are going to be better off for all of this. So this is Tani and Kate at the Marketplace of Ideas, third Thursday. We're signing off.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, stop recording, but just to say, Tani and I will be at Appy. And so if you want to get together on Saturday night before Appy, let us know.